He may be the only one we don't have yet. No, he's not here yet. Well, we'll give it another minute and then I will call the meeting to order. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I think we'll begin. The September meeting of the library board is called to order. Roll call.
Board members Brenmoen,
Here.
Lally,
Here.
Naker,
Here.
Tao,
Here.
Tolbert, Yang,
Here.
Chair Prince,
Here.
six present, 1 absent, being board member Tolbert. Item number 1, resolution 21-1289, approving the minutes of the April 2021 library board meeting.
And I see a motion to approve by Ms. Naker. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Brenmoen,
Aye.
Jalali.
Aye.
Naker.
Aye.
Tao.
Aye.
Tolbert.
Yes.
Yang.
Aye.
Chair Prince.
Here, aye.
7 in favor, none opposed. The minutes are adopted. Item number 2, resolution 21-1238, authorizing certain activities to support a cooperative relationship between the St. Paul Public Library and the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library.
And I have asked Director Pankert if she would make a brief staff report on this expansion of the role of the Friends in launching a capital campaign. Ms. Pankert?
Thank you, Chair Prince. So this resolution is in part administrative housekeeping and in part setting the stage for some bigger efforts moving forward, as Chair Prince mentioned. And so this resolution really documents and formalizes the fundraising and programming partnership between the Friends of St. Paul Public Library and St. Paul Public Library. And you can see a set of 9 activities here that it puts into writing and authorizes. I think probably the most significant on this list, and the one Chair Prince is calling attention to, is item number 9 that says St. Paul Public Library and the Friends will develop and implement a capital campaign to attract public and private funding to support the library's 5-year capital plan. And so this again just formalizes and puts into writing the Friends' intention to be a partner with us here at the city in seeking private and philanthropic funds to support public investment in library capital needs. So I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, that's just a little bit more context in what you're seeing here.
Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion from Ms. Yang to approve. Roll call.
Brenmoen,
Aye.
Jalali,
Aye.
Naker,
Aye.
Tao,
Aye.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Yang,
Aye.
Chair Prince.
Aye.
7 in favor, none opposed. The resolution is adopted. Item number 3, SR 21-37, staff report on the 2022 library budget proposal.
And we Mayor Carter and Ms. Pankert presented the library budget at the Hamlin Midway Library on August 19th. If you haven't had a chance to watch the video, I would recommend it. It's your comments, Ms. Pankert, were excellent. It's very exciting that we're seeing some return to growth in our library budget. So take it away, Ms. Pankert.
Thank you. Just give me a minute to pull my slides up. And let me confirm that you can all see them. Got them?
Yeah.
Okay. So today I'm going to focus on the general fund and ARP funding, and then in October I will be before you again, and I'll go into greater detail on the library's proposed special fund budget as well as the capital investment funding. So in building the budget for 2022, we prioritize the items that you see here on this list. We are very focused on maintaining and restoring robust access to social infrastructure in our city. And that includes via our 13 library locations, the bookmobile, and the many online resources that libraries provide. We know that libraries are an essential element of our city's social infrastructure, and with sufficient open hours and staffing, our libraries provide high citywide access to welcoming public spaces where residents can connect, learn, discover, and grow. As we look ahead to 2022 and again, building a budget that supports this mission and supports the strategic direction, we're very focused on high quality space as a public service in and of itself. And that opportunity that significant capital investment can bring for specific locations and also citywide to enhance resources and experiences for residents through their libraries. And finally, we continue to focus on areas in our service and operations where we are not going back to pre-pandemic models, but instead we're going forward. And so there are specific areas where we are making changes to our structures, our systems, our practices that advance equity in our libraries and in our community. And so this slide presents a high-level overview of the major changes in the 2022 library budget proposal. There is a $351,000 or a 1.9% increase in the library levy. The majority of that supports salary and healthcare cost increases for our existing staff. There are also a few smaller line item changes. There's a $10,000 addition to ensure we can maintain the HVAC and filtration enhancements that were added as a pandemic safety measure. As part of a multi-year plan that we have been working to stabilize general fund support for the library's collection and materials budget, there is an increase of $50,000 in levy support for collection and materials, and that's balanced by a decrease of $50,000 in parking fund revenue. And then finally, the $70,000 contingency that was budgeted in 2021 has been removed from the 2022 base. The proposed budget restores positions that were eliminated by the 2021 budget, and those positions are proposed to be funded using ARP funds. The restoration of these positions enables us to restore open hours to pre-pandemic levels, and that's something that I will discuss a little further later in the presentation. And if you have questions, just stop me along the way. This chart gives a multi-year picture of the library budget, the total amount, and also a breakdown by funding source. The detailed numbers and backup for this chart are available in the responses we submitted to the narrative questions. The single biggest funding source for library staffing, facilities, and services is property taxes, or the library levy. That is the dark blue bar that you see here. And the white dollar amounts on the blue bars show the amount of library levy funding year by year. The 2022 proposal increases the library levy over what it was in 2021 and puts it at an amount that is slightly below 2019 funding levels. The addition of ARP to fund the service restoration is visible here on the yellow bar. And the green bar illustrates the CDBG funding that was allocated in 2021 and is continued through 2022. That funding allows us to extend the Career Labs project, and then it also last year mitigated further reduction in library staffing and service hours. That CDBG funding, that green bar, will end after 2022. This chart here provides an overview of the library's general fund. This supports the basics of library operations: staffing, utilities, basic facilities costs, materials, and represented in this chart, the biggest funding source again is property taxes, about 18.4 million budgeted in property taxes through the library levy, and then smaller amounts in a couple of other funding sources. Included in this chart as part of our general fund are 175,000 cultural star and 100,000 parking fund. Both of those are for library materials, and then 17,000 in local government aid. The purple slice here is a variety of central service fees. And so this is funding that is assigned to the library's budget, but gets transferred out to support citywide functions. The green slice here supports the library's collection and materials purchases, as well as technology, hardware, and some additional supplies for basic operations, thinking about things like paper for copy machines and toner for public printers and that kind of thing. The red slice covers building maintenance needs, repairs, technology contracts, and so on. These are costs that often increase over time. They have an inflationary increase, and the budget does not always have that inflationary increase. And the library social worker is also included in this red slice of this pie. And then the largest piece of this pie, the blue section, is employee expenses. And I think when you think about the library budget and where does the money go, it's important to remember that nearly all of the very visible public programming, thinking about things like homework centers, Summer Spark, and that kind of thing, nearly all of the programming aspects for those are funded with special funds. That this, what you're seeing here, pays for the staff and keeping the doors open, but everything above and beyond that is generally funded with special funds. And so this slide just gives you a high-level overview of the impact of the proposed 2022 budget. And big picture, this budget proposal is very good news for library services for residents in St. Paul. The ability to restore positions that had been eliminated allows us to restore the citywide level of open hours to pre-pandemic levels. Also very important is that we'll be able to keep up with those air quality safety enhancements that we put into place, and we continue to stabilize funding for our library materials purchases. So overall, again, this budget proposal is good news for library services.
Ms.
And
Pinkert?
yeah.
Ms. Naker has a question.
Thanks, Chair Prince, and thanks, Director Pinkert. And it is really good news to see these hours being restored. I'm curious whether those 12.5 FTEs, are those all of the FTEs that you lost in 2021? And if not, are they all the ones that you need back? And then can you talk a little bit about what your conversations with the administration have been like about using ARP dollars to fund what is really an ongoing investment for these salaries?
Right. On the first part of your question, the 12.5 that were eliminated are all of the positions that were eliminated in 2021. Yes, all of them come back through this proposal. I think, I talked about that green bar being CDBG positions. If you go back a couple of years, those were positions that were general fund supported, and they were moved on to CDBG, again, in part as a effort to mitigate further staff reductions. So as we look ahead to 2023, library positions that are funded by CDBG or ARP will need a different funding source for 2023 and beyond. But for 2022, in terms of getting the positions back in a way that we can restore hours to residents, yes, this is full restoration. In terms of decisions about, which funding support or which funding source supports staff positions, I'm going to ask Director McCarthy if he wants to speak to that.
Sure, Board Chair Prince and Board Member Naker. It's a good question, and I think Ms. Bernock referenced that on the budget overview at the beginning of the council process here, where we were continued to be challenged with revenues not recovering as well as we would have liked in 2021, and so there are some things that we're using ARP or proposing to use ARP as bridge funding for this year to restore some of those crucial positions in both parks and library, with the goal of having a long-term plan to phase off of those funds and phase back onto the general fund as, ideally our revenues fully recover next year and into the future. So we'll have, continued conversations about how to support these positions and these ongoing needs for next year's budget process.
Any further questions, Ms. Naker? I think you can continue, Director Pinker.
Okay, thank you. So this slide just puts into historic context the impact of the hours reductions that we implemented in 2021. And this is really following up to a very similar picture that I showed you last year at this time. And so you can see that we are currently operating at what is the lowest level of weekly open hours citywide since at least 2004. And you can also see that the restored funding and restored positions will let us get back to a pre-pandemic level of service. I think it's important to note the kind of path of history here, and that really our libraries here in St. Paul never fully returned back to the number of hours, open hours across the city that they were at in the kind of early and mid 2000s. And so I do think library service hours are something that we should all continue to monitor and consider as our city's population continues to grow. But in terms of later this year, being able to get back to the pre-pandemic level of service is just extremely exciting for us. And so when we can expand those hours, as all of you know, that means expanded services, expanded resources, and that helps residents and community members get their needs met around digital inclusion, internet access, economic support, job support, connection to information, connection to learning, connection to neighbors and to each other. And so open hours, I think, can sound like kind of a wonky thing, but really the impact of open hours for residents and neighbors in our city is such a big deal. And we're just really excited to be able to build our team through some of the hiring we'll be doing and filling positions. And at this point, we anticipate expanding hours on or around November 6th of this year, so later yet this year. And this slide is a repeat of information that I shared with you by email a couple of weeks ago. And this shows the full schedule of open hours and our timeline to restore services. And again, we anticipate expanding hours on or around November 6th of this year. And I want to call out that in the spirit of not just going back to how things were before, but taking an opportunity to re-examine the way we do business, we've made some slight shifts in the allocation of hours across the system. The most significant shift is in the expansion of Saturday hours. And so in recognition of the important role that libraries play in the lives of children and families, the importance of weekend service hours, and the accessibility that is provided by our neighborhood locations being, right where people are, right where they live and work. We will be expanding Saturday hours to provide a standard 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. schedule at 12 of 13 locations. And so for 7 of our locations, if you compare this to their pre-pandemic schedule, at 7 sites, this is a longer Saturday than they had before. The trade-off for this is at George Latimer Central Library, which will operate as a 6-day-a-week library rather than a 7-day-a-week, with Monday being a closed day. Again, this is a trade-off. We are focused on returning to where we were, but this is not an expansion beyond where we were before. And so we will monitor the impact of that change over time. But at this point, we are really looking forward to providing that expanded Saturday access at all of our neighborhood sites.
Thank you, Ms. Pinkert. I have a Council Member Mr. Tolbert has a question. And then I have another question.
It's more of a comment than a question, but not that there won't be users who are affected by the closure on Mondays of George Latimer. I'm sure there, but I think numbers wise, I suspect we'll see a lot more families and people being able to utilize the neighborhood libraries by having those expanded Saturday hours. So I think it's really a good, I don't know if it's amendment or evolution or whatever it might be, but I appreciate adding those hours, because I know the more weekend hours that we have, the more that parents who work the traditional Monday through Friday job can take their kids, and also just individuals who work those hours too can also have a little more flexibility of making to the library rather than having to do it after work when they have to do dinner and other events with their kids too. So I think it's a good change.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. And I have a question, Director Pankert, about the hiring process. In that we know that we are hiring staff with one-time money, will they be hired as temporary employees? And I know in seeing the work that HR has put forward about special terms that apply to jobs that are filled under the ARP funding, there isn't an expectation about any continuity, and I believe their connection to the appropriate union is limited. And I just wonder if we aren't concerned about, especially for higher level positions like the facilities director and the communications director, if we're going to have the same opportunity to hire the most qualified people when they are being selected for temporary positions.
Board Chair Prince, thank you for that question. It's my understanding that these positions will be hired as certified, although I want to put a little asterisk by that. I would want HR to confirm that, or maybe Director McCarthy has additional information. But it's my understanding that the library positions will be hiring for, as part of the restoration, will be certified positions.
Okay, Mr. McCarthy, can you speak to that?
Sure, Board Chair Prince, that's my understanding as well. But just like Director Penkert, I'd want to confirm with Director Newborn and HR to make sure that we're all tracking on the same page. But that's the same understanding that I have as well.
So by hiring them as certified positions, it creates the expectation that they will be continued. So next year when we get here, when we're trying to find the funding to keep them on, that is the expectation that they are being hired under, that they will be permanent.
Board Chair Prince, that's my understanding. Again, we will follow up with Director Newborn.
Okay. Okay,
confirm.
thank you. And please follow up and copy the full board on that.
Will do.
Ms. Naker?
Thanks, Chair Prince, and thank you, Director Penkert. I really am so happy to see these expansions. Once again, I think it's going to make a huge difference, especially those weekend hours, as Councilmember Tolbert, Board Member Tolbert said. And I do want to recognize that it is a cost at George Latimer Central, and it will be a burden on downtown residents and stakeholders. But I do appreciate the thought that's gone into how many additional hours just that one day can add then citywide. So I think overall the benefit outweighs the cost. And I think it's also important to point out that, and maybe you said this already, but just in case not, that Latimer will be getting an additional day compared to what it had during the pandemic. So it is also seeing a restoration of hours from what it had during the pandemic. I just wanted to ask, looking at not the number of hours per se, but which hours. I just noticed how much variety there is across our different branches. And I'm wondering whether and how often we survey our users to find out, is 10 to 8 the best, or is 8 to 6 better? And just, to the needs of families and the needs of professionals and different people, how often we check to make sure these are the right hours.
Board Chair Prince, Board Member Naker, thank you again. Very good question, and appreciate your support to an acknowledgement that this hits, George Latimer Central. There is the trade-off there and the reach and benefit that this change does provide. And yes, you're correct that currently right now, George Latimer is 5 days a week and is Tuesdays to Saturday. And so this restoration will restore Sundays at George Latimer Central, which is really good news too. To your question about how we, determine hours, I put a number of the factors here that we look at in terms of surveying users or even the data we're able to track. I will say that our data, our gate counters are really rudimentary. And I think as we, think about modernizing city services and some of our data collection systems, I think our understanding patterns in our library use were really limited to do that in a data-based way, because really the gate counters just give us kind of a sum total that we manually enter into spreadsheets and tally up sort of a week at a time or a month at a time, but we don't have a real strong ability to say, well, are Tuesday mornings bigger than, Thursday evenings? And so what we do though, is we, try to have some option available for folks as expansively as we can, and balancing what does any individual site provide with, if I couldn't get it at my, nearest site, could I get to a library somewhere in the city? And so the hours do move around, and that is in part an attempt to, again, within the current resource allocation, to make sure there is some balance of some evenings, but sometimes that means like we can't be open in the morning that day, or well, we're going to do a weekend, but then that might mean a shorter day during the week. And so that's when you see those moving around, like for example, some days where we're open 12 to 8 p.m. on a Monday to Wednesday. That's because, we're budgeted, we can afford an 8-hour day. And so we want to do, some of those days are 10 to 5:30 and, some are 12 to 8, and trying to provide options. But there's a trade-off in that it's not as consistent, right? That if we just could know, hey, any day of the week, my library is going to be open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. or something, that would make it, of course, much easier for anyone. You wouldn't have to look up schedules or anything, but that would be a really different resource ask too for the city. And so I think some of what you're seeing here is a chance again, or an attempt to really expand access across a number of factors, while also working within the existing resource allocation.
Yeah, and just if I can quickly follow up, Chair Prince, I mean, I appreciate that, and I think it's just it's an interesting question as to how maybe we can get that data, especially as we're doing some of this. I know as the Friends are going to help us do some of this engagement for the capital campaigns, maybe that's an opportunity to do some surveying of users. I was just thinking about the conversation you and I had about expanding early learning centers in our libraries, and about how for young parents, the best time of day might be like 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. because that's when you need the help. So I think it would be, as long as it's the same budget for us to have 8 hours, to find out which 8 hours might be an interesting question.
And Board Chair Prince, Board Member Naker, I will also add, it isn't always exactly the same budget either, dependent on which 8 hours. That one, there are probably 10 different items listed on here, and one that's not on here is contractual obligations. And there are times where, whatever the bargaining unit agreement, it may be more expensive to be open at a certain hour on a certain day than on other days. And so I would just add, our labor agreements as just one additional of the many factors that come into play here.
Thank you, Ms. Pinkert. Any other questions at this moment? I think you can continue.
Great, Thank you. So in the next section, I'm going to just provide brief impact updates on a couple of areas of strategic investment that have been of interest to the library board in the past. And the first of those areas is our collections or our materials funding. And I think the good news here is that over time, funding for collections and materials here in St. Paul for our libraries has stabilized. You can see through this chart that OFS has really been a great partner with us in weaning off reliance on fund balance to fund what is really an ongoing and core need, and shifting to the more reliable general fund support. I think also, as we look at this over time, our total level of collections funding is still lower today than it was 10 years ago. And we know that this is another area where materials get more expensive due to inflation. And so the same amount of funding doesn't go as far as it did in the past. And then we also know, and we've talked before, and I'll share a couple of more examples here, but the growing demand for e-materials, for e-books, for e-audiobooks adds pressure to the materials budget. We know those materials are in super high demand, and we know that they are a really critical element of any library's accessibility and equity strategy in collection development. That ebooks and e-audiobooks are really important ways to provide material in different formats that work for all people. And they are significantly more expensive than print materials. And so again, the same funding level goes less far when you're adding a bigger portion of it needs to go to e-materials. And so just a few highlights and kind of data points to bring the collection funding and collection usage to life. Again, we continue to see real increase in demand for e-materials. And here you can see a real world comparison of the cost of print versus ebook and audiobook. And so a hardcover book costing just under $15. The ebook for libraries costs nearly $60, and the e-audiobook is $109. So these are not like small incremental price differences. These are like multiplier effect of just more expensive when we purchase e. Library Go continues to be a very strong partnership with St. Paul Public Schools and a really critical equity strategy for reaching young people in St. Paul. And for those of you who know, just or a quick refresher on Library Go, that means that students at St. Paul Public Schools and 9 other schools in St. Paul that have opted in have an electronic library card available to them right through their student ID number. And for St. Paul Public Schools students, their iPads are preloaded with library apps. And so that means that a St. Paul Public School student, just through their iPad and through their Library Go account, has access to a library without maybe ever coming to our buildings or needing to come to a building. And so just when I think about scale and how do we reach people at a citywide scale, Library Go is so powerful. And I think here too, we have, just some data points about the impact of a budget. Again, stabilization is good news, and stabilizing when prices increase. So our juvenile nonfiction collection, as an example, the average date that items were added to our collection was 2011. And when you think about the speed at which information is changing and expanding, and the role that in this case, nonfiction materials can play in a curriculum support role or in, general education about the world, having up-to-date and relevant information is really critical. I think we're all very aware of the information environment right now. And the investment in a library collection budget is really an investment in an up-to-date and relevant information ecosystem for a community. And then the last item on here is just a note that using the newly available census data, we will be using that to do a realignment of our world language collection spending, and just make sure that we're buying the right languages and that we are building a library collection that really is the community's collection, and that we maximize benefit to our community members who live in St. Paul.
questions? Ms. Pinkert, just one question. Given those realities, especially that is the one about that much of our nonfiction collection is older than our library users of that material. Would you recommend that we try to put more into the collections budget? I mean, is our contribution in the mayor's proposed budget adequate?
I think, I mean, any library director is always going to tell you put more in the library collection, right? And so I think I don't want to miss. There is a really good news story here about investment and collection funding. And when you look at that multi-year story and you look at stabilization, you don't see big swings in funding levels, and you look at moving on to more stable sources. All of that has been a big deal and has happened very quietly and kind of behind the scenes, but is very, I think, focused on the right goals for our community and making sure we're invested in high impact areas. And I think just being mindful that a library's collection, again, is the community's collection, and the ability to have current, relevant, up-to-date information and to have it in the formats that people want it and need it is a function of how much funding we put in. And so, again, really good news around stabilization. And as we look ahead, in the far future, just knowing like over time, if that is a flatline funding graph over the long term, it's a decrease in terms of how much we're able to update that collection or, again, make those variety of formats available to residents.
Thank you.
So, question.
Councilman, Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Chair Prince. Director Pinker, I'm just curious here, going back to this collection material here, and it's very pricey, right? Like if you just in the Kent Cougar example there, that's almost $200. I'm just curious, why couldn't we like work with the publishers of these books to put banners on our website and to generate income that way to self-support the material in the collection, or even partner with local business like Target. It seems like we're getting a lot of traffic to our website, and we would just need their codes to put into our codes, and their banner will show up, right? And so it would be a click away. Has that been thought about?
Board Chair Prince, Board Member Tao, it is a really big issue you are honing into here. And so, yes, the prices here are very expensive, and these are prices for library systems. And so publishers, the way e-content works, it's much more driven. When you buy a hardcover book, we own that book. The St. Paul Library owns that book. We keep it for 2 years or for 10 years, but it's, we might resell it. But we own it. An ebook, essentially, we are licensing. We are licensing content. We are renting content from a publisher, and publishers own the terms of those licenses. And publishers have different terms for library systems than they have with other vendors. And so this is really, there are significant, I don't know if they're policy questions. They are bigger than St. Paul Public Library for sure. But just know it's one of the tensions in, building an ebook collection is the terms are really driven by the major publishing houses, and they set really different terms for library systems than they set for other vendors.
So
and if there's interest in follow-up and more, I could go into that deeper in a future library board presentation or send some follow-up information, because there has been some organizing and some advocacy in the library world to try to raise this as an issue, even up to the federal level, around, are there, any kind of I don't know if it's antitrust legislation, what are the sort of federal rules governing this?
Mhm.
but
So
it's an issue.
right. So couldn't we generate money from our website placing ads for the publisher, for example, or even like Target, so that we could raise revenue to for collections of material? Like, can we put ad banners on our website?
Board Chair Prince, Board Member Tao, the idea of selling ads on our public website would raise a whole other set of questions for me.
Why?
Selling private
Like,
corporation ad space on a public website, I think that's just, it raises a host of policy questions that we
but
would
we
want
we
to
already
consider.
but we already do that, right? Metro Trend, like the Green Line. I mean, that's a government entity. We have Vikings and we have private folks advertising on it. And so why couldn't we do that?
Board Chair Prince, Board Member Tao, I hear your question. I will do some looking to see if there are other areas in the library world where people sell ad space on their library website as a revenue source.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tao.
So the next area I want to discuss is digital equity. And digital equity continues to be one of our highest priority areas for service and for experimentation and for partnership. And several years ago, as many of you know and have been along for the ride, St. Paul Public Library began offering mobile Wi-Fi hotspots available for checkout with a library card. And that program was paid for with a series of one-time investments. And then as part of, I believe, the 2021 budget, the program became a general fund line item. And so again, ensuring sustainability of this as a core service. And so with that funding in 2021, we have been able to purchase an additional 51 hotspots with the Wi-Fi service and put those out for borrowing for our community. And then given the extended need for home internet during the pandemic and the move to virtual service for, banking, healthcare, so many things, we also extended the checkout length to provide patrons with longer and more consistent access when they borrow one of those devices. We have been surveying borrowers of the hotspots to better understand their needs and their experience. And what we've learned so far is that 91% of those borrowers are people who report having no internet access at home. And the most frequent uses for these hotspots are for education, online banking, staying connected to friends and family, and for work. And the 3 zip codes that saw the most checkouts were roughly in the north end, the east side, and West 7th and downtown. And then we know that, the mobile hotspot loan program is not the end all be all for meeting digital needs here in St. Paul. And so in an effort to continue to respond for the truly urgent need for internet technology and digital support during the pandemic, but beyond, this will be an ongoing need. We have been testing a number of different partnership and service models to provide new and different options for residents to get connected. And many of these partnerships have been with Ramsey County Workforce Solutions. Just cannot say enough about how great it's been to work with them. And through that partnership, focused on reaching job seekers and people in career transition. We established the Tech Pack model, which provided a laptop internet service and access to Digital Navigator for eligible residents. We are partnering with Ramsey County on a digital equity roadmap project that will take a look at policy issues, community-informed needs for digital equity, and infrastructure and service model options that we hope will inform a roadmap towards long-term solutions here in St. Paul. We have a state grant to pilot a digital navigators service model. And this is hiring people in a navigator role whose job is to serve almost as like a caseworker for people's digital needs. And so helping folks get connected with affordable devices, with sustainable internet options, and then also connecting them to the skills and training support that is needed to make technology work for them. And this digital navigator model is one that has proven very successful in other areas of the country, sometimes based in libraries, sometimes based in other community organizations. And we're really excited to test it out here in St. Paul. That grant goes through June of 2022.
Ms. Naker has a question.
Thanks, Chair Prince. Director Penkert, given the very high demand for the hotspots, I assume even with the 51, there's probably still higher demand. And then as you provide longer borrowing times, obviously, then that limits the number of those available to others to check out. Is there any plan on the part of libraries to use ARP dollars for additional hotspots? That does seem like one-time investment that would really be a good use of ARP.
Yeah, that's a great Board Chair Prince, Board Member Naker. It's a great question. We've gone back and forth whether it's city ARP dollars. There's been a couple of federal funding sources, some specifically for libraries, or like mentioned here is this Federal Emergency Connectivity Fund grant that all make hotspots would be one of many eligible expenses. And so we've, considered, should we scale up and lend out hotspots by the thousands? And we have landed on no, for now. That's not the way we're reaching people. Sometimes that's driven by funding source and the need to really be able to do eligibility verification. And when someone checks something out with a library card, we can't verify eligibility. We can't verify, did you lose a job? So sometimes it's about, the requirements of the funding source and whether or not that type of lending model is the best fit. And in other ways, we think through some more targeted partnerships, it's, almost a more surgical approach to reaching pockets of people where we know, there's like a high density of people in need. And so, for example, the next item on this list, this Federal Emergency Connectivity Grant application, again, that's a partnership with Ramsey County Workforce and with Ramsey County Library, where we're really focused on providing an internet solution. And that could be a hotspot, or it could be Comcast Internet Essentials and digital navigator support to a targeted group of 550 participants who are receiving MFIP. If we are to put, 2,000 hotspots out to the community, that doesn't mean that the people who, it's not the only way to get it out to people, So going through having sort of a multifaceted approach where that's available, the hotspots are on the shelves, you can come into the library, check it out. And also, if you are connected to other programs, through your connection to that program, your caseworker might say, and hey, do you need internet? Here's an internet resource. And then be able to not only tell you about it, but provide the support to see it all the way through. Again, to get connected, to use it to connect to skills training. It's a little bit more like wraparound service type model. So we've seen it as a both and. How do you make things widely available on the shelves for anyone who walks in the door? And also, how do you take a little bit more proactive and, again, targeted approach with individuals or communities where we know there's kind of a higher density